What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 3 of Carried Away, the official podcast of everydaycarry.com, where we nerd out about all things EDC gear and maybe try to teach you a thing or two while we're at it. So, I'm Bernard, the founder of everydaycarry.com, and I'm joined by my editor, Mikey.
Hey, what's up?
Today, we're going to discuss the concept of minimalism and maximalism. There are two schools of thought when it comes to what is enough and what is too much in terms of gear. And the goal of presenting the sort of continuum or spectrum here is to help you figure out where you fall on it and how you can rethink your everyday carry in this framework. But first, what's new this week? Spyderco just revealed some novelties for 2023. We can link them in the show notes, but I wanted to know which one you're most excited about, Mikey.
So I really like this reveal. It's a bunch of knives that are kind of classics in their catalog, like the Paramilitary 2 and the Para 3, which are kind of like the favorites from the past few years. But my favorite is the Paramilitary 2 and Magna Cut, because now Spyderco is dipping their toes into the Magna Cut game. And Para 2 is kind of like an all-time classic. So it's one of their big knives. It's kind of ambidextrous, and it's something I've wanted for a really long time. So how about you?
Well, okay, so it's to be clear, it's not just a Para 2 Magna Cut, right? It's a Para 2 Salt. So what is Salt? What am I talking about?
So Salt is their line of knives that are designed for use in near the water or around activities near the water. So they're designated by handles that are yellow. And the nice thing about Magna Cut is, while it's not purely a true rust-proof steel like something like LC200N or Vanex Super Clean, it's close. It's really close. It's like super second place and still has the properties of like the super tough knives and the super edge retention knives. So it's a good candidate. It's the best, one of the best candidates for their Salt line. And the fact that it's like high vis, bright yellow is like a really good touch for it, I think.
Yeah. So I mean, I also am pretty excited about the Magna Cut inclusion in Salt, the Salt series. I do think I prefer the Para 3, actually, the smaller one, than the Para 2. Also in Magna Cut. And I just like that it makes sense to use Magna Cut, not for the sake of using Magna Cut because it's popular, but because it does align with the intended purpose of the Salt series. So it kind of makes sense there. And it just, Para 3 just happens to be like a great overall EDC knife, like maybe one of the GOATs.
Yeah, it's the distillation of the Spyderco design while also being sub 3 inches. So it's really popular choice for an EDC knife versus like the PM2, which is more of like technical origins and a bit larger for most people.
A bit larger for most. Doesn't matter though. I still bought one. I just recently bought one. I could not resist. Like honestly, I've lost not lost, but I've gotten rid of most of my Spyderco knives. My collection of Spydercos is down to just like the small, weird, ugly, cute knives. That's the Spyderco Rhodey and the Spyderco Pochi. But you know, Spyderco was like my first and probably favorite EDC knife brand when I was first starting. I started with a stainless steel Cricket. Just I thought it was just really slim and cool looking. I didn't realize how not useful that blade shape is. It is kind of like this, almost like a leaf shape, but then it had a recurve into like a hook, bill, beak kind of tip. Just not actually useful. Then I moved on to a Spyderco Leaf Storm, then eventually a Chaparral Titanium. So it's going to be really cool to get a Para 2 finally, and then probably a Para 3 just because it will fit my hand better. And, you know, maybe I'll pick up one of these Salt things because of the Magna Cut steel.
Interesting that you started with Spyderco, because like completely unrelated to you, I started with Spyderco also, since back in the day. That was them and Benchmade were kind of like the two big ones. I also started, the first true EDC knife that I got was a Native 5. And like you, I didn't know any better. I got the half serrated one, which wasn't really useful for everyday stuff. So in the same boat, like it's really nice. I really liked it. It was ambidextrous. It had a lockback mechanism and it had a nice leaf shape, but it was half serrated. So it's kind of half useless to me over time. I had to get rid of it, but I really have fond memories of that. And there is a new Native 5 as part of this new collection. Maybe something for me to check out also, to reconsider and like touch back with my roots and get back into the Native.
Yeah, but would you go for the partially serrated again?
No, absolutely not. I just have no use for serrations of the
Okay.
knife.
Okay, but it's we should just use this to bring this back to the actual topic of today's episode of minimalism versus maximalism, because one could argue that having both the serrations and just a plain regular edge on one knife is a form of minimalizing, right? Because you're cramming as much function as you can into one thing. So I think that's an example of what minimalism is, and we can just sort of describe all of those core tenets of minimalism in terms of everyday carry gear in just a second. But I did want to talk about why I'm even thinking about minimalism versus maximalism. I'm thinking about minimalism as a whole, but more specifically these days, digital minimalism, just because like I be online a lot for work and whatever. It's just like the state of social media, I think, these days. But I also like, aside from EDC, like EDC tech, right? So I ended up having just an iPhone Pro that I use to like make content and stuff. But I then started dabbling in dumb phones and like e-readers and just separating out all the functionalities of what a phone can do into their individual parts and having a dedicated tool for that. So last week I was at a cafe or whatever trying to study after work or something, and I had with me my main phone for work and then a personal phone that I tried to keep. Here, I'll show you. It's a iPhone SE 2016. It's just small and a little bit dumber. Then I had a Digicam for taking photos, and I have my Walkman for music, and I have like this new e-reader here for reading stuff, and all of that is just separated from my phone, right? Then I'm like, oh yeah, minimalism. Then I look at all this stuff on the table. And I'm like, is it actually? Like they say less is more, but is it actually though? And that's when I wanted to think about how people might end up in this situation when it comes to EDC, because you could have everything in a Swiss Army knife and then maybe your phone and be like, yeah, I'm done. But then for some reason, a lot of people want to have a dedicated tool for each thing. And that's how we end up in like this minimalist camp and we have this maximalist camp.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as you were introducing all of the stuff that you were using to minimize your maximalist smartphone, you end up maximizing like everything else, like the physical aspect of it, or like the in the pursuit of like
Yeah.
individually improving specific functions. You are now introducing additional functions into your, like, more stuff to worry about. So like, to not get overwhelmed by all of the distractions and all of the functions of a smartphone, which has all of it, you're now removing individual features. And I guess in a way it is kind of minimizing like the mental load also, because you can't discount that it's kind of overwhelming to always be online, to always be getting notifications. If you have a smartwatch, if you have a smartphone, if you have a laptop that's always connected, it's like you're bombarded from everywhere. You're targeted by ads. You're like getting short form video everywhere. Check out our TikTok, by the way. Yeah. Before I wanted to make a distinction between minimalism as a concept and something that's a minimalist aesthetic. I was talking with a friend last week, and he got confused with, like, he was kind of conflating minimalism versus minimalist. How would you define something as like
Hmm.
the idea of minimalism versus something that looks minimalist or like has a minimalist aesthetic?
Okay, yeah. Thanks for bringing that back to actually defining what minimalism is, because my example was actually not minimalist at all. I think minimalism is just about simplicity and doing more with less. That actually, the maybe not even doing more with less, maybe just simplicity as the fundamental aspect of minimalism. And in the case of everyday carry, I think it kind of boils down to carrying fewer things, because that overall simplifies what an everyday carry is. And usually, what follows by carrying fewer things is you still want to maintain some base level of functionality or versatility. And what ends up happening is you might combine a lot of things into one multifunctional item or piece of gear. So a classic example would be a Swiss Army knife, and you carry a Swiss Army knife or a multi-tool, and then that's it. So for example, you might have a Leatherman, like plier-based multi-tool, and then that's it. maybe even say, for example, the new arc that came out. It's like all the hype. You have a Leatherman arc and it has a Magna Cut blade, and that's it. And you don't need to carry like a Hogue Deca Magna Cut and Knipex pliers to have both. So you're kind of combining those two. So that's kind of how I would define minimalism as sort of the philosophy or the practice versus a minimalist aesthetic. Minimalist aesthetic to me is just something visually that is simpler, and simpler in a way that is not without any design merit or value, but intentionally simple in a way that's aesthetically pleasing, or maybe even functional or ergonomic in that sense. But if we're talking just about a minimalist aesthetic, then I think it just has to look good with less, like a less is more kind of aesthetic.
So to bring it back to our topic, given the setup that you just described, that you just showed, would you consider that a minimal setup or a maximal setup? Because from your explanation, I'm getting that you're trying to minimize functionality by having like more purposeful tools and like individual functions into these individual things. Like you are carrying more, but conceptually you're minimizing your carry. Is that correct? Is that how you would characterize what you just showed?
I think it's a little bit complex because philosophically, it is minimalist,
Mm-hmm.
but practically or in the real world, it is more maximalist.
Mm-hmm.
And to make that distinction, it is minimalist philosophically in that each item becomes simpler in its function, but as a whole, the entire thing is maximalist because I have a separate thing for each thing and they perform better than if they were to be combined in my smartphone, for example. So it's kind of a matter of, you don't want something that's like jack of all trades, master of none. I have individual masters of one
Mm-hmm.
together as a group.
That's a really good distinction, that you're not compromising. You're finding true like functional things that are exceptionally good at what they do. Just like the good example there is the Knipex pliers, right? Like you can get pliers as part of a Leatherman, you can get pliers as part of a Swiss Army knife, but the Knipex is specifically designed to just be pliers and do pliers well. In the same way, like you could tell, like if you have, just as an example, like a nail clipper, you can have one that's a dinky part of like a little cosmetic set that's designed to be more portable for like say for travel, or you can have those like really fancy lever based ones that are titanium and everything, but then they're the best
Hmm.
nail clippers that you could ever buy, right? So there's a comparison of that. So I wanted to ask you now, I feel like this isn't a regular setup for you. Would you consider yourself day to day more leaning on the minimal side? Like if you were to run out to get groceries today, what's your like core set, and would you define yourself to be more minimal or to be more maximal in that sense?
Well, it's kind of different for me now. For some context, I live in Los Angeles again, so I have a car, and I think car culture changes how much you carry.
Mm.
Because I don't need to have a bag with me all day compared to like when I was living in the city, like New York or something. So I say I'm more on the minimalist side. And it's just, I think in general, for most things, I am on the minimalist side. I do like things to be unencumbered and simple and kind of easy with as little friction as possible. And because I described, I'm living suburban Los Angeles, and, I don't have a family to like protect or provide for. It's kind of just me. My life is not as adventurous as others might be, and I feel okay without a lot of other things in my carry. If I were to go get groceries, I would maybe have an e-reader for just to curb the habit of like checking my phone or something while waiting in line, and instead maybe doing something a little bit more productive for my brain. But otherwise, my general core carry is fairly minimal. I made a video not too long ago about how I put everything on my keychain. So my keychain itself is pretty much packed with all the functionality I want, but it's still very small. So it has like a flashlight. I've got like a Rovivon keychain light on it, a Swiss Army knife, like Alox Classic SD, and then my key organizer and my car keys, right? And then my car, it has an emergency kit and another EDC pouch of backup gear. And I also have like an EDC pouch that I can just grab and go. And I don't always carry that, but then it's gonna be at the bare minimum my keychain. I'm looking at my desk right now, so it's like I've got my keychain, and then I've got my folder of the day. So this is like a Vosteed corgi, and then I got my wallet, and then my phone, and all that other stuff. So overall, I would say I'm pretty minimalist.
Mhm. Just to make it about myself and also be on the have a discussion on the other side of
Yeah,
things.
please do.
um, if I were to run out and get groceries today, I would be actually pretty basic. It's just going to be my phone, earphones, and my wallet for the most part. However, as a result of like my personality and the nature of our job where we're constantly testing gear, I like experimenting with like slings, with like tote bags. I like testing different laptop setups between bags. And just to demonstrate myself as like an extreme in an extreme position, let me just stand up real quick and demonstrate. I'm wearing kind of like a fancy vest today with a bunch of pockets. It's made by a techwear company here in the Philippines. But I'm just going to demonstrate that if I were not carrying a sling bag, I have a Velcro pocket in which I can pull out a flashlight. I have another pocket. I have my earphones. I have another pocket. You just mentioned it earlier. I am not carrying also a Leatherman, which is actually one of the core parts of my kits. But this is kind of like just like a cosplay demonstration into going to the topic of what do you think about people who are, I don't want to call it overpacking, but I think there is something to be said about being prepared. And I kind of feel for that because I've been in a lot of situations where we have a saying in EDC where it's better to have something and you don't need it rather than you need something and you don't have it, right? It's a really common saying that we've had over the years. And it informs part of what we carry, right? Like for example, if I'm carrying a bag, I don't think about it. I put my first aid kit in there. I put a multi-tool in there. I put a flashlight in there because I've run into so many situations where I just maybe I'll leave it at home today, and then I needed an aspirin or I needed a bandage to cut myself or something, or I needed like antiseptic for something, or like
Hmm.
I get injuries or something, or like I have friends who are like they tripped in the movie theater and they cracked their head, and I'm like, oh man, if they just had like a tiny flashlight on them, this wouldn't have happened, right? So add up all of those stories over the years, and it's like I'm kind of leaning more towards a bit more maximalist, just for those situations. So what do you think about people who are like me
Yeah,
out there?
yeah. So I know we presented like this idea, these two schools of thought of minimalism and maximalism, but I think it's important to make the distinction that it's not like a binary dichotomy, right? It's not you're either a minimalist or you're a maximalist. I
Mhm.
think there is room to exist on this kind of spectrum or continuum where you might lean towards one more than the other, but not, you're not super diehard one camp or the other.
Mhm.
And I think now that we're kind of talking about these examples of it's better to have and not need than to need and not have, that's the old adage. The maximalist side, I think, is something worth exploring a little bit more now. And like, why would people want to do that? And like you said, I think it's just this idea of being prepared for everything. And to them, they'll value that peace of mind in being prepared in a similar way. I think that minimalists might value the feeling of freedom and unencumbrance and simplicity of a minimalist setup.
There's a point I want to make here where, regardless of which side you're sitting on, it's really fun figuring out how to make each of them work for you. Like in your example, I'm sure leading up to the decision to find that specific e-reader, reading to the decision of finding that specific MP3 player, you did a ton of research to find like this is a little too big, this has a little too battery for being too small, this doesn't have all the features I need. And I think that becomes the next fun part, right? Like no matter which side of the fence you sit on, like if whether you want to carry a lot of stuff or not a lot of stuff, figuring out that perfect balance of this is perfect for me to carry around, or this thing is great for something at home, or this is something that I would leave in my car, and then just experimenting and finding that balance between the two of them.
Yeah, I think the process is the same regardless of where you are on the spectrum of minimalism versus maximalist. The process in finding and assembling the carry, it's just the direction you go in that process is sort of defined or determined by what you value. So I think this is a good place to sort of compare and contrast the pros and cons basically of each side. I think we already talked a little bit about minimalism, where things are simpler, things are quicker, more lightweight, maybe less mental overhead of worrying about what sort of gear you have on you and maintaining all of that. And then this just simpler expression of the things that you use and carry. And I think for some people that might resonate with them, and they just feel better about having less and not worrying about that kind of stuff. And then on the other side, with maximalists, you have people who want the peace of mind and security, self-sufficiency, and preparedness for everything that might come their way.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I think of them. Like, I think of survivalists and preppers kind of to be on the maximalist side.
Yeah.
Because they are thinking of every scenario and they have something for it. Do you want to expound a little bit upon the maximalist stuff?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
like you were saying earlier, there's the factor there of not only providing for yourself, but let's say you have people you want to provide for. Like, for example, if you're in a natural disaster zone, like if you get hurricanes or if you like get flooded, which is in my part of the world a big issue. If you get rained out, if you get power outages, there's no choice. You kind of have to be maximalist about it, because you want to prepare for eventualities that you might run into, even if there's a low chance for it. There's also like the issue of some people who also want to feel safe. Like they might feel like they're not safe in their part of town. They might not feel safe in their part of the world. And they want to just be like, have a more secure wallet, for example, or like not have as much stuff on them in case like somebody tries to rip them off or something, or like they might be forced to be put in a dangerous situation and they have to run for it or something. I think that's really the key there. Like, what are you valuing, and like what are you putting stock in as far as what your mental load is for the day, or like what your tasks are for the day. Which now, okay, there is a trend going on now where people have a lot more trinkets in their EDC than than they used to be. Have you seen those, and what do you think about those?
Oh, the things that the community lovingly refers to as pocket trash. Is that what we're talking about?
Pocket jewelry, pocket trash. Yeah.
I don't know where this fits in this discussion of minimalism versus maximalism, but I guess it kind of does, in the sense that maximalists will only carry something if there's a particular function, right? Or is that wrong? Is that a minimalist thing?
Aha, that's actually
Maybe it's more of a minimalist thing.
I was actually just thinking of that. Like both sides can like take
Yeah,
take
are you trying to trick me here?
Yeah, there is something to be said about both sides taking ideas from the other, because like you can also make the argument like where a maximalist would be like, I'm gonna make this simple. I'm gonna have one thing for every possible scenario that I come against, and it's that simple. And in a way, that is kind of minimalist, because like you are right. And in the same way,
okay, I think you're onto something. So maybe I'm wrong.
in the same way, like you have all of that stuff that you aren't actually minimizing. You may be maximalizing your enjoyment for the day, or like you may be maximalizing your state of mind where you want to be more like present in the moment of one single thing, and you're maximizing that. So there could be an argument for both sides in like blurring the definition.
Right. Well, first of all, no maximizing of enjoyment allowed. That's just simply not allowed in everyday carry. But I will say, I think maybe I was just wrong in the entire premise of this episode, where I'm presenting this as two diametrically opposed concepts that are on a continuum, and it's not necessarily one or the other. But maybe what we're talking about now is like a yin yang kind of system, where they balance each other out, but in each of them, there's a tiny bit of the other. And I think that kind of encapsulates this idea. But going back to like pocket trinkets and stuff like that, I don't know. I think that's just a trend within like the enthusiast community, and it's not as popular or even accepted with the larger everyday carry community, or even the casuals who are just kind of into EDC gear, especially given how expensive some of those trinkets can be. I'm talking about like focus tools, fidget toys, and things that don't provide more traditional utility function. Yeah. So it's kind of out of the scope of this. Yeah. And I don't really know too much about it, honestly, because I don't carry any of them either. But I think one aspect of maximalism that we didn't really get into yet, we kind of alluded to it, was the idea of dedicated tools. So, why are people carrying dedicated tools when they could just consolidate their tools? I think the distinction there is that usually a dedicated tool is something that performs so much better than an integrated or consolidated component of another option that it's worth carrying. It's worth the extra weight. It's worth the investment and worth the pocket space. And that is sort of what ended up happening with my attempt at making a more digitally minimalist carry.
That's right. I could use an example here. Like
Yeah.
a really popular thing early on was the Swiss card. It's really nice. It's a card-sized multi-tool. Technically, it's a multi-tool. It can fit in a wallet. It comes with a pen. It comes with a knife. It
Mm-hmm.
comes with a pair of scissors. But not they're not great. Like it's the pen is completely tiny. It's just like the size of a thick toothpick. The scissors are
It's
okay.
like an ink refill.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And then the knife is, you're not going to be like preparing any food with that. You're not going to be, I mean, you can open some boxes with it, sure, but it's not going to be like excellent at anything. And it's just like a basic stainless steel as well. So while the convenience is there, you're not really making the most out of it if it's a functionality that you're going to need specifically in your day. Like if you're working construction, you're not going to be using that over like a proper hammer, a proper pair of pliers, a proper pen that can write on any surface in the dust and in the gravel and all of that. So
Right. That example of the Victorinox Swiss card is not one that performs the best in any of its domains of functionality. It's maybe like the bare minimum viable kind of product for that sort of function or tool for that function.
mhm.
But I think I think it's worth saying that a maximalist might carry it anyway. The difference is a minimalist might carry it as their only form of cutting, slicing and writing, and they're okay with that because it meets that bare minimum function, and they're just going to have to live with that kind of performance because it's so portable
Mhm.
and it's so convenient. However, a maximalist might also carry that same thing, but I don't think we talked about this yet, as a backup or a redundancy. So they might already have this insane folding knife. They might have, their own dedicated scissors or whatever, and then like this crazy machined pen that's super durable, and then have the backup thing in their wallet just in case any of those fail on the job or they lose one, because it is so important to them to have that functionality available that they will carry two of something. And it's very often summarized with the saying two is one and one is none.
And that's exactly where I would describe myself. I have a backup of a backup of a backup. Like I have what's something on my person, and then I also have something similar functionally in my bag, and I also have something more robust, something more functional at home at my desk. So it's just like nested dolls of redundancy, and the fun for me has been figuring out, okay, so if this is going to be in my person, I want it to be like a lighter backup, like the Swiss card. If it's something that's going to be in my bag, it can be a little bit heavier. It can be like the Leatherman, because it's like I'm not going to notice the weight if it's in my bag. It's going to weigh on my pockets, sure, but if it's in my bag, no problem. And then you have a car, you can have now like a much bigger battery for your phone or something, or like you can have a much bigger water bottle with you, an extra
Mm-hmm.
change of clothes that would fit in your car and stuff like that. And then at home, I got a you can have like the full ass toolbox and like all of the hammers and everything that are full
Yeah.
dedicated home repair tools. Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've kind of talked about what minimalism is, or what we thought it was, and maximalism, and kind of compared the two and what EDCers in each camp might do, how do we sort of, what are things that we can do to shape our EDCs to go one way or another? If you've decided, like, you know what, upon reflection, I do value a more minimalist setup, or I do think I vibe more with the maximalist, what can they do to their EDCs to kind of align with those philosophies?
I think exposing yourself to the community and like the media of EDC, like taking a look at how others are carrying their gear taking a look at like how certain professions carry their gear that might be similar to yourself. Like we're a couple of nerds who work out of our out of our caves in the house, terminally online. So our needs for
Mhm.
EDC is a result of our work and having to review the gear. But that's completely different from somebody who like, I don't know, who likes going camping on the weekends. That's going to be different from somebody who has to take a train into the city every day. That's going to be different from somebody in law enforcement or as a fireman, or like having that insight of wanting to learn more about the gear and then exploring and talking to more people in the community that are similar to your like life situation or like your commuting situation or like your profession. I think it would be a good place to start. And then seeing like I learned a lot from nurses and doctors. They have their first aid kit is completely different from how I built my first aid kit of just like aspirins and
Mm.
band-aids. And I asked them, what would you recommend that I can get like over the counter that can go into my first aid kit? And then they helped me build a much nicer first aid kit than like my basic thing in an Altoid stent, for example. So participating in the community, taking a look at what's out there, and just having like a mindset of like, could this thing be useful for me? I think that's a good takeaway. Like taking a look at every um, thing in somebody's carry in a photo that they share, for example, and then considering would that be useful to me? Would I like a Leatherman Arc and all of its features and all of the toys that it comes with, or do I really just need the Knipex in my day to day? Like I just need to fix a plumbing problem from time to time.
Mhm.
Is that enough? $15 versus $230. Some other things to consider there. So what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to sort of inform your decision making when it comes to building your EDC by looking at what other people in particular fields might do, and especially like fields that you think might associate more with a maximalist. Like, do you think a first responder would be a minimalist? Probably not, because just by nature of their profession, they're preparing for like the absolute worst case scenario. So if you want to kind of build towards a maximalist approach, then yeah, maybe you look at first responder EDCs or something, or yeah, people who go outdoors a lot, or their work is in that field, maybe. Whereas for minimalists, yeah, maybe you kind of look at people that are more creatives or like digital nomads or something, or they travel a lot, where it makes sense that they need to have uh, a lighter load. Um, so yeah, that's a good place to think. I think for the framework that I would work in or ask myself, like the questions I would use to guide for minimalism might be like, do I really need that thing? And then for maximalism might be, will this cover a base that I haven't covered? I think those are the two questions that I would ask for those two camps.
Mhm. We now have arguments pro, well, not against. Like we now have a clearer discussion of what would go into like a minimalist idea or like a maximalist idea. What is now our takeaway for people who are watching this episode? What do you think is the thing to remember here? So I think one of the things there is what you said earlier, where what do you value in your day to day? Do you value a lighter load, a better peace of mind, or are you preparing for more things than the usual person that you got to consider? I think is one of those key takeaways here.
Yeah, in addition to sort of identifying what you value and then placing that into the things that you keep on you, when is something enough versus too much? And then I think that will kind of inform where you lie on the spectrum. And just being kind of mindful of that question as you develop your EDC. Is this enough or is this too much? Like every step of the way. So it could be with every substitution or every addition to your carry. And that can kind of help you stay a little bit more focused and intentional about what you carry. And then I think when you have that focus and intention on what you carry and an understanding of what you want to use it for, then you can get the most value and enjoyment out of it.
I like it. So we would also love to hear where you
Yeah.
guys sit on the spectrum of, do you carry for fewer things? Do you carry more things? Are you at the point where like you want to just collect stuff? Like are you actually, we see you guys like collecting out there and maybe
Yeah.
that could be, there's no discounting the fact that that might be something you enjoy. That's totally fine. Like I am jealous of the people with like 50 knives and all of them are like super high quality, nice stuff. And like you can rotate something every day of the week and then still have something new and fresh. I mean, nothing wrong with that. But we would love to hear
Yeah, that's
where, yeah.
actually a whole new layer.
Mm,
That's actually a whole new layer of this discussion that we're having about minimalism and maximalism. I think we didn't really clarify the scope of this sort of practice. This is just like the stuff you use and have every day, but you might be a collector or a one and done kind of person. So it's like even just the not even the things you're using, but just the things you own in general. That's a different thing. And I would have to say, even though I practice as a minimalist, for some reason, I don't know, brainworms or something, I am a collector. I just like having a bunch of stuff at the same time, but not like on my person at one time. But I
right.
might have, like a shelf or something or a closet full of stuff that I like.
And
But
interestingly, I am the complete
anyway,
opposite in that regard. Like I am a one and done. I'm like, I'm gonna find the absolute best thing. I'm gonna get
yeah.
that, and I am done. I'm out of there. I don't wanna. I don't wanna stress my. Because there. Just as a quick anecdote, you know how you can have like a watch box, and there are 10 slots in the watch box, and you have 6 watches. There are 4 slots. I gotta fill it up with something, and you just repeat that with like you have 12 shoe boxes and 10 pairs of shoes. You got space for 2 more. It's gotta it's
Ugh,
gotta be like it's the you
ugh.
think you're immune
Yeah, I
to
know
it.
what you're
You
talking
think
about.
you're immune to it, but like I could probably fit 2 more pairs of shoes in there. Or like you have a knife case with 10 slots. You got 9 knives. What's one more, right? It can't hurt. So that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to complete the
Complete
collection.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I like that.
So, speaking of completing things,
Yeah,
this is a good place to kind of wrap this episode up on our discussion of minimalism and maximalism. Originally, we presented these two ideas as two opposite ends of a spectrum, but I think after kind of discussing what each camp might value or how they might practice and operationalize those concepts, we realized that, there's a little bit of the other one in each side. So maybe it's less of a linear spectrum and more of like a yin yang kind of setup.
I like that.
And there is, yeah, everyone is going to be somewhere in this kind of in between, maybe. And there are different ways to do it and different ways to shape your EDC to go towards one direction or the other. If it's for the minimalist camp, you might think about, can I get away with less here? Is this making my life simpler with the same, with a smaller amount of gear? Or for maximalists, it's like, do I feel peace of mind in being prepared for all these things? Are all my bases covered? Is it okay for me to carry more? Can I get away with that? Because you value being ready for more things than a minimalist might. And then, with that knowledge, I hope that this was kind of useful in helping you understand where you are in this and how you can kind of change your EDC to get it just where you want it. And, we're also very curious, like, what do you guys think about minimalism versus maximalism? And where are you on that kind of spectrum? So, you could leave a comment or send us an email, something like that. We could talk about it more in future episodes. But other than that, I think we can wrap this up.
Yeah, I like it.
Yes, I'm Bernard, and I'm here with Mikey, and this has been Carried Away. If you like this, please share this with a friend. Subscribe wherever you're listening to or seeing this. We're on YouTube and Spotify to start, and also follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, X, whatever, everything now at Everyday Carry. And you can get more of our content, great articles, and buying guides, reviews, that sort of stuff on everydaycarry.com.
See you next time.
Peace.